The descent took longer every time. 400 feet of black water pressing down, the weight of it building in my skull even through the mixed gas I was breathing. My headlamp carved a narrow tunnel through the murk, sediment hanging suspended, drifting particles that could have been anything. Could have been nothing. Down here you learn not to think too hard about what floated past your face. The depth gauge read 370 feet. Still dropping. I'd done deeper dives than this. 20 years working salvage and recovery. You racked up plenty of bottom time that'd make recreational divers shit themselves. But 400 feet was nothing to take lightly. Nitrogen narcosis territory if you were breathing the wrong mix. Decompression sickness waiting if you rushed the ascent. And if something went wrong down here, surface was a long goddamn way up. The USS Seawolf materialized below me like a ghost taking shape. Skeletal. That's the word that always came to mind. The submarine's hull had collapsed in sections, metal ribs exposed where the pressure had finally won after decades. Rust bloomed across every surface in shades of orange and brown, soft-looking in my lamp beam, but sharp enough to slice through neoprene if you weren't careful. I adjusted my buoyancy and slowed my descent. No point rushing this part. The contract from Pacific Recovery Solutions had landed on my desk 3 weeks ago. Taylor Lucas, project coordinator, corporate voice over the phone asking about my deep water experience. I'd been straight with her. 20 years diving, commercial salvage certification, familiar with wreck penetration, and confined space recovery. What I hadn't mentioned was the 3 years of debt crushing my dive shop into the ground, or the fact that I was maybe 2 months from shuttering the whole operation. She'd named a figure that made my hands go still on the paperwork. Enough to clear the debts, enough to keep the shop running another year, maybe 2 if I was smart about it. Enough to stop lying awake at night doing math that never came out right. So yeah, I'd taken the job. 390 feet. The Seawolf's conning tower came into focus, listing at an angle that made my inner ear complain. I finned slowly around it, checking my gas supply out of habit. Plenty left. This dive was just reconnaissance. Taylor had been clear about that in the briefing. The briefing had been professional. Efficient. Taylor had spread diagrams across the conference table in Pacific Recovery's San Diego office, pointing out access routes and structural weak points with a pen that probably cost more than my monthly insurance payment. The cargo is located here. She'd tapped a section amidships. Forward hold, deck 3. We need you to assess access viability and document interior conditions. What's the cargo? I'd asked. Her pause had been brief, practiced. Classified materials, military salvage. The specifics aren't relevant to your work. I should have pushed harder on that. Should have asked more questions. But the contract sat there between us, and the number on it had already rewired my brain. Third dive, she'd continued. First 2 were exterior assessment and entry point location. This one you penetrate to deck 3 and report back on what you find. Simple enough. Except nothing was simple at 400 feet. I reached the hull and slowed to a hover, adjusting my position with small fin movements. This was my 3rd time down here, and I'd started to know the wreck's geography. The way the stern section had separated and settled 20 yards from the main body. The debris field spreading across the ocean floor, personal effects and mechanical parts slowly being claimed by silt and time. The entry point we'd identified on Dive 2, a hull breach large enough to fit through without scraping tanks or catching equipment. Familiar territory now, or it should have been. I swept my headlamp across the hull plating, tracking toward the breach. The light caught something that made me stop finning. Marks. Deep gouges scoring the rusted steel. I hung there in the water, neutrally buoyant, and stared at them. Long parallel scratches, 4 of them grouped together. They'd peeled the metal back in strips, curling it like paper. Like something with claws had dragged them down the length of the hull with enough force to tear through reinforced plating. My breathing echoed loud in my regulator. In, out. Keep it steady. The marks looked fresh. That was the thing that didn't fit. The Seawolf had been down here for decades, since the Cold War, according to what little information Taylor had shared. Everything should have been uniformly corroded, covered in the same rust and marine growth. But these gouges showed bare metal underneath, brighter, newer. I finned closer, reached out with one gloved hand. The edges of the marks were sharp under my fingers. I traced them carefully, following the path they'd carved through the plating. Whatever made these had scored the steel deep, 1/4 inch, maybe more. The metal had been peeled back with enough force to curl it outward, creating ridges that caught my glove. 20 years of diving. 20 years of wreck work, of seeing what the ocean did to ships and submarines and anything else that sank into its territory. I'd seen shark bites on hulls, seen damage from impacts and explosions and structural failure, seen what happened when metal spent years underwater, how it corroded and weakened and eventually gave way. I'd never seen anything that looked like this. 4 parallel marks, evenly spaced, running down the hull in a pattern that suggested, what? Claws? Nothing I knew of had claws that could tear through reinforced submarine plating. Not at this depth. Not with this kind of force. My headlamp beam followed the gouges down toward the ocean floor. They continued across the hull, disappearing around the curve of the submarine's body. More than one set of them. I counted 3 separate groups of marks, all showing the same pattern, all looking too fresh for a wreck that had been down here longer than I'd been alive. I hung there in the black water, 400 feet from sunlight, and tried to make it make sense. Tried to fit what I was seeing into any framework of knowledge I'd built over 2 decades of diving. Nothing fit. Nothing I knew of could score steel like this. I keyed the radio, hand shaking enough that I had to grip my wrist to steady it. Joshua, you getting this? I've got something down here that doesn't... The words caught in my throat. Doesn't what? Make sense? Belong? Exist? Static crackled back at me. Not the clean silence of a dead connection, but something worse. White noise that rose and fell in waves, punctuated by fragments of sound that might have been Joshua's voice, or might have been interference from the wreck itself. Metal does strange things to radio signals at depth. I knew that. 20 years diving, I'd heard every variation of garbled transmission you could imagine. This wasn't that. Joshua, confirm position. I kept my voice level, professional, the way you're supposed to when things start going sideways. I need you to log an anomaly at my current depth. More static. Then what sounded like words, stretched and distorted until the syllables meant nothing. The rhythm was wrong. Too slow, then too fast, then breaking apart entirely into pulses of white noise. I checked my depth gauge. 218 feet. Well within normal radio range for the equipment we were using. The Seawolf's hull might interfere with the signal, but not eliminate it. Not turn Joshua's voice into that warped mess coming through my speakers. My chest tightened. Not panic. Not yet. But the first whisper of it. That little voice every diver learns to recognize. The one that says you've crossed from routine into something else. I tried twice more. Got nothing back but static and those wrong-sounding fragments that might have been speech once. The cold was seeping through my wetsuit now, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. Hard to tell the difference when your hands won't quite steady and your breathing's gone shallow. Protocol said surface. report the communications failure, reset the equipment, start again. I didn't surface. The corridor stretched ahead of me, and the first thing I registered was the angle. Submarines don't do that. They're built in sections, sure, and those sections aren't always perfectly level when a boat settles on the bottom. But this wasn't settling. This was design. The passage sloped downward at maybe 30 degrees, steep enough that I had to brace myself against the walls to keep from sliding forward into the dark. I pulled Taylor's blueprints from the waterproof case on my belt. The laminated pages felt slick under my gloves as I oriented myself. The compression chamber where I'd found the device, that was marked clearly enough. Standard Seawolf design, positioned amidships on the lower deck. But this corridor didn't appear anywhere on the schematics. The space it occupied should have been crew quarters. Narrow berthing compartments stacked 3 high, exactly the way the Navy packed sailors into submarines for months at a time. Not this angled passage leading down into sections that couldn't exist. I ran my light along the walls. The construction looked consistent with the rest of the boat. Same riveted steel, same utilitarian finish. No obvious signs of retrofit or modification. Whoever built this had built it as part of the original structure. My breathing echoed in my ears. In, out. The rhythm of it usually centered me, kept me calm when the dark and the pressure started working on my head. Now it just sounded too loud, too fast. I checked the blueprints again, ran my finger across the deck plan, counting compartments, measuring distances. The math didn't work. According to Taylor's specifications, the Seawolf was 353 feet long. I'd entered through the sail, worked my way aft through spaces that matched the blueprints exactly. The compression chamber sat right where it should have been. This corridor extended beyond the submarine's stern. That wasn't possible. I'd seen the wreck from the outside during my descent. The whole boat was intact. Damaged, yeah, but complete. Hull plating covered every section. There was no extra length, no hidden compartments extending past the original design. But the passage kept going, angling down into darkness my light couldn't penetrate. I should have surfaced right then. Should have clipped the device to my belt, followed my guideline back to the entry point, and gotten the hell out of that wreck. Every bit of training I had said so. You find something that doesn't match your briefing, you abort. You don't improvise at depth. You don't explore unknown spaces alone. You sure as hell don't push deeper into a submarine that's apparently bigger on the inside than the outside. Basic stuff. The kind of rules that keep divers alive. I kept moving forward. Told myself I needed to verify what I was seeing. Document the anomaly properly before reporting it. Taylor had hired me for salvage work, and you don't get paid for incomplete jobs. The device was secure in my bag, sure, but she'd want to know about this corridor, about the structural impossibility I'd stumbled into. That's what I told myself anyway. Truth was simpler. I'd been diving 20 years, and I'd never seen anything that made my hands shake. Never found anything that violated basic physics. The curiosity hooked into my chest and pulled, stronger than the fear trying to push me back. I wanted to know what was down there. The angle steepened as I descended. 30 degrees became 40, then 45. I had to half crawl, half slide, using the walls for purchase. My fins scraped against the deck plating. The sound rang out sharp and metallic, echoing off into the dark ahead. My air supply was good. 1,400 psi still in the tank. Plenty to get me back to the surface with the safety margin intact. My depth gauge read 231 feet now, 13 feet deeper than the compression chamber, which meant I'd descended at least. The math stuttered in my head. 13 feet of depth over maybe 40 feet of horizontal distance. That was too steep. Way too steep for the angle I was traveling. I checked the gauge again. 233 now. Still dropping. The corridor was taking me down faster than it should have been. Another impossibility to add to the list. The passage opened without warning. One second I was wedged into a narrow corridor. The next I was floating in open space. My light swept across the walls and my breath stopped completely. Spherical. The chamber was perfectly spherical. Submarines don't have spherical chambers. Can't, really. The pressure hull needs to be cylindrical to distribute the stress of deep diving. Spheres are efficient for pressure vessels, sure, but they don't pack efficiently into a boat's length. Every cubic foot matters when you're designing a submarine. This chamber didn't care about efficient packing. I estimated maybe 30 feet in diameter, big enough that my light couldn't illuminate the whole surface at once. The walls curved away in every direction, smooth and seamless. No rivets, no weld seams, just continuous steel that looked poured rather than assembled. Then I saw what covered it. Blue light pulsed across the sphere's interior. Soft at first, so faint I thought it might be reflection from my own lamp. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized the light was coming from the walls themselves. Not the walls. From what grew on them. Bioluminescent organisms coated every surface. They clustered in patches at first glance, but as I looked closer, I saw the pattern. Irregular lines that branched and reconnected, forming networks that spread across the curved steel. Each organism was maybe the size of my thumbnail. Translucent bodies that glowed from within, pulsing in rhythm. Not random rhythm. Coordinated. A patch near what I arbitrarily decided was the chamber's equator brightened. The glow spread to neighboring organisms, rippling outward in a wave that traveled across the sphere's surface. When it reached the opposite side, it reflected back, the pulses meeting and interfering in patterns that shifted and changed. I'd seen bioluminescence before, plenty of it. Dinoflagellates that lit up when you disturbed them, leaving trails of green fire in a boat's wake. Jellyfish that pulsed as they drifted through the water column. Deep sea fish with lures that glowed to attract prey. This wasn't any of those. The organisms pulsed again, a different pattern this time. Faster. More complex. The light traveled in spirals that tightened toward a point near the chamber's top, then exploded outward in concentric rings. Almost deliberate, I thought. Almost purposeful. My hands had stopped shaking. I floated in the center of the sphere, watching the light show play across the walls, and felt something shift in my chest. Not fear anymore. Something else. Wonder, maybe. Or the cold certainty that I'd found something nobody was supposed to find. 20 years diving. 20 years of wrecks and salvage jobs. Of exploring spaces that used to hold people, and now just held water and rust. I'd seen coral-encrusted destroyers and submarine pens reclaimed by the ocean. I'd watched nature take back what humans left behind. But I'd never seen anything remotely close to this. These organisms didn't belong to any species I knew. Didn't fit any classification I'd learned. The way they moved, coordinated, purposeful, suggested something more than simple bioluminescence. More than reflexive response to stimulus. The blue light pulsed again, faster now. The patterns grew more complex, layering over each other until the whole chamber glowed with shifting geometry. And I floated there in the center, watching, while my air supply ticked down and the impossible space pulsed with light around me. The compass caught my eye first, just a twitch at the edges, nothing dramatic. I'd been checking it every few minutes out of habit. 20 years underwater teaches you to track your instruments without thinking about it. Then the needle started spinning. Not drifting. Not pulling toward magnetic north with that lazy certainty I'd relied on since my first open water certification. The damn thing whipped in circles, full rotations, like someone had stuck a magnet underneath and was twisting it for fun. I tapped the housing. Old reflex. Stupid reflex. The kind of thing you do when your brain hasn't caught up to what your eyes are telling you. The needle kept spinning. Faster now. My chest tightened. I'd seen compasses fail before. Flooded housings, air bubbles, cheap construction, but they didn't fail this way. They stuck. They drifted. They gave you bad readings that could kill you if you trusted them in zero visibility. They didn't spin freely. All magnetic north erased. The radio crackled. I reached for the transmit button. Some half-formed thought about telling Joshua what was happening. But the static resolved into something else before my fingers found it. A pulse. Deep and rhythmic. Throbbing through the speaker with a frequency I felt in my sternum as much as heard. I knew that sound. God help me. I knew it. 3 years back, maybe 4, I'd fallen down a rabbit hole on one of the diving forums during a slow week at the shop. Someone had posted about unexplained deep ocean sounds, the kind of thing the Navy picks up on hydrophones and can't explain. Jokes about sea monsters mostly, speculation about volcanic activity, ice sheets, whale songs pitched too low for normal recording equipment. The bloop, that's what they'd called the famous one, recorded in the Pacific back in '97, loud enough to be detected across 5,000 kilometers. Scientists said it was probably an ice quake. Probably. I'd read the threads, looked at the spectrograms, even listened to the sped-up recordings someone had linked. Then I'd forgotten about it. Geological noise, deep earth settling. Nothing that mattered to a commercial diver working coastal wrecks and pier inspections. But I remembered it now. That same pattern, that same rhythm, coming through my radio, down here at 190 feet, inside a collapsed freighter, where there shouldn't be anything transmitting at all. My hand moved to the volume dial, turned it down. The pulse continued, unchanged. Same intensity, same bone-deep throb. It wasn't coming through the speaker. It was coming through the water itself, and the radio was just picking it up, translating those pressure waves into sound I could process. My equipment was hearing it the way my body was feeling it, a vibration in the environment, something massive moving through the ocean around me. I swept my headlamp across the chamber. The light caught suspended particles, rust flakes, dissolved metal, empty water, dark bulkheads, the same wreckage I'd been documenting for the past 40 minutes. Then I saw the eyes. Just for a second. A reflection at the edge of my lamp's reach, outside the chamber where the hull had torn open. 2 points of light catching and throwing back the beam with that distinctive eye shine you see in deep-sea fish. Tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind the retina that lets creatures see in darkness where sunlight never reaches. I'd seen it before. Lanternfish, hatchetfish. Once, on a deep dive off the continental shelf, something big enough to be a sleeper shark. But those eyes had been empty. Black mirrors. The optical equivalent of a camera lens. These eyes looked back. I can't explain how I knew. There was no expression to read, no body language, no context my brain could process into meaning. Just 2 reflected points in the murk beyond the wreckage. But I knew. The same way you know when someone's staring at you across a crowded room. The same way you feel observed. Intelligence, awareness, focus. The light shifted. Both points moved in unison, tracking left across my field of vision with the smooth coordination of binocular sight. Something massive displaced the water outside the chamber. I felt it through my wetsuit, a pressure change, a current that hadn't existed 3 seconds earlier. The slow, deliberate movement of bulk through liquid. Methodical. Controlled. Whatever was out there wasn't drifting with the current. It was circling. The eyes vanished. My lamp caught nothing but particles and darkness. I swept right, then left, trying to reacquire the reflection. Movement in my peripheral vision. Lower now. The water near the collapsed bulkhead shifted, flowing inward where it should have been still. Something brushed against the torn hull. The metal groaned, a sound I felt through the deck plating beneath my fins as much as heard. Low frequency, resonant. I turned, brought the light around. The eyes were closer, maybe 15 feet away, just beyond the chamber's largest opening. They held position for a breath, 2 breaths, reflecting my headlamp with that same terrible awareness. Then, they moved again. Descending, passing below my line of sight. The creature, because I couldn't pretend it was anything else now. Couldn't file it away as shark or grouper or some known quantity my training had prepared me for. Circled the wreck with movements that spoke of size I couldn't calculate. The water displacement alone told me it was bigger than the boat I'd launched from this morning. Bigger than most things that had any business existing at this depth. I waited for it to rush the opening. That's what predators did. They assessed. They positioned. They struck. The eyes appeared again. Different opening. The creature had moved around the chamber to the starboard breach, changing position without sound, without visible approach. Watching me. Still watching. My breathing rasped loud in my ears. I forced it slower, counting the seconds. Panic burned oxygen. Panic killed you. The eyes tracked away. Moved off to my left. Then I heard the scraping. Metal on metal. The shriek of steel dragging across steel. I spun toward the sound, lamp cutting through the water to the port side exit. The route I'd marked in my mind as primary egress, the cleanest path back to open water. Something dark moved across the opening. Hull plating. A section of collapsed bulkhead. It slid into position with the grinding protest of wreckage being manipulated, repositioned, blocking the exit. I stared, watched the debris settle into place, wedging against the torn edges of what had been my escape route. The scraping started again. Different direction. The starboard breach this time. I turned, caught the movement in my light. More debris, a section of railing, deck plating still attached to support beams. All of it dragging across the opening with that same purposeful motion, pulled by something I couldn't see clearly in the murk. Appendages. That's the only word my brain offered. Not arms, not tentacles, not anything specific enough to classify. Just shapes in the darkness, moving with coordination and strength that had no business existing. The railing wedged into place, sealed the starboard breach as thoroughly as the port side. My heart hammered against my ribs. I counted exits. 3 left. The overhead tear where weak sunlight filtered down. The stern access, partially collapsed but navigable. The ventilation shaft I'd noted earlier, tight but manageable. More scraping. The creature moved to the stern. I stayed frozen. Couldn't move. Couldn't process what I was seeing through any framework that made sense. The stern access disappeared behind a twisted sheet of hull plating. I watched it happen, watched the metal slide into position with the precision of someone arranging furniture, not the random settling of wreckage on the ocean floor. 3 exits down, 2 remaining. The ventilation shaft. I turned toward it, already measuring the diameter in my head, calculating whether I could fit through with the tank on my back. Tight. Real tight. But possible. The scraping started before I could move. The creature was already there, already ahead of me. A mass of shadow crossed the shaft opening, something dense and irregular wedged into the mouth of the vent. Deck equipment, maybe. A winch housing. Too dark to tell, and it didn't matter anyway. The shaft sealed, blocked solid. 1 exit left. I looked up. The overhead tear gaped above me, maybe 20 feet up through the collapsed deck levels. Jagged metal teeth rimmed the opening. Weak light filtered down, murky green, barely enough to register, but it was there. Open water. Freedom. The current shifted again. That same pressure change. The creature rising. I saw it pass across the opening, just a silhouette against the faint light above. Massive. The bulk of it eclipsed the tier completely for 3 seconds, 4, 5. My brain tried to assign scale and failed, tried to identify shape and found nothing that matched. Then it started dragging something into position overhead. I couldn't see what. Too dark, too far, too much water between me and it. But I heard the scraping, felt the vibration through the wreck as something heavy settled across the opening. The light dimmed. Not gone, not completely, but reduced. Filtered through whatever the creature had positioned overhead. 6 exits, all blocked, all sealed with the same methodical precision. I stood in the center of the chamber, lamp sweeping across the walls, the blocked exits, the empty water. My breath came faster despite my efforts to control it. The regulator hissed with each inhalation. The eyes appeared again. Right in front of me this time, just beyond the portside debris. Close enough that I could see they weren't simple reflections. There was structure behind them. Depth. The light caught layers I couldn't identify, organic architecture that didn't match anything in my 20 years of diving experience. They didn't blink, didn't move, just held position, watching me through the blocked opening with that same unmistakable intelligence. It had trapped me, not attacked, not killed, trapped, with purpose, with planning, with the kind of calculated behavior that required understanding cause and effect, spatial reasoning, prediction of movement. This wasn't a predator responding to stimulus. This was something that thought, something that planned. Something that looked at a human diver and decided to cage him inside a shipwreck using the wreck's own debris as bars. The pulse came through the water again. That same deep rhythm. The bloop frequency, transmitted from something close enough now that I felt it in my teeth. The eyes watched me, waited, and I understood with perfect, horrible clarity that whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with me yet. I checked my oxygen gauge. Habit, really. The kind of thing you do without thinking after 20 years underwater. The needle sat at 40 minutes. 40 minutes. My stomach dropped so hard I tasted bile. 40 minutes of air left, and I was trapped inside a dead submarine with something big enough to shake steel hulls hunting me through the corridors. The math was simple. Brutal. I'd burned through my supply faster than I should have. The panic breathing when that thing first appeared, the exertion swimming through the Seawolf's twisted guts, the adrenaline dump when it slammed into the outer hull. All of it ate oxygen. Now I was paying for it. I forced myself to breathe slower. In through the regulator, count to 3. Out. In. Count. Out. The technique worked for anxious clients on their first deep dives. Had to work for me now. The chamber pressed in around me. I'd thought it was beautiful when I first swam inside. This cathedral of rust and barnacles, lit by those pulsing blue-green lights scattered across every surface. The bioluminescence had seemed magical. A gift. My headlamp swept across the walls again. The pattern was too perfect. Too deliberate. I'd seen bioluminescent plankton before, dinoflagellates that lit up when disturbed, turning night dives into swimming through liquid stars. I'd seen phosphorescent jellyfish drifting through kelp forests off California. Even seen deep-sea anglerfish once, on a technical dive past 200 feet, their lures glowing in the black water. This wasn't any of those things. The organisms coating the chamber walls pulsed in rhythm, synchronized, drawing the eye deeper into the space, away from the entrance I'd squeezed through. And now that I was looking, really looking, I could see how they clustered thickest near the back wall, the darkest corner, where the opening had to be, where something big enough to hunt submarines could slip inside. A trap. The word crystallized in my mind with the cold certainty of nitrogen narcosis, except I was thinking clearly now. Clearer than I had since entering this graveyard. The bioluminescence was the lure. The beautiful, impossible light show that had pulled me off course, made me forget my training, convinced me to swim inside a collapsed chamber in a submarine that had been dead for 80 years. And I'd gone willingly, eagerly. Jesus Christ. I thought about the anglerfish again. The way it dangled that glowing appendage in front of its mouth, patient as death, waiting for something small and stupid to swim close enough. Then the jaws would snap shut, and that was it. Over. This chamber was the same thing, just scaled up. Scaled up to catch something bigger than plankton, scaled up to catch me. My breathing wanted to spike again. I clamped down on it, forced the rhythm to stay steady. Panic used oxygen. Panic got divers killed faster than equipment failure or bad planning or any of the other 100 things that could go wrong at depth. But understanding the trap wasn't enough, because the trap was bigger than one chamber. I'd seen 6 wrecks on my descent. The Seawolf where I'd entered, sure, but also a fishing trawler with Soviet markings, a cargo freighter listing at 45 degrees, something that might have been a destroyer based on the gun turrets. Others too damaged to identify. All of them clustered in this same square kilometer of seafloor. Taylor had called it a graveyard. Blamed magnetic anomalies, unusual currents, all the standard explanations for why ships went down in specific locations. I'd accepted that because I'd wanted to, because the job paid enough to solve my problems. Now I understood. They weren't casualties. They were bait. Something had been pulling ships down here for decades, maybe longer, accumulating wrecks the way a spider accumulated husks in its web. The older vessels drew salvage divers and researchers. The mystery drew curious idiots willing to take risks for footage or glory or money they desperately needed. Drew people like me. How many divers had come down here before? How many had seen the bioluminescent chamber and thought they'd discovered something wonderful? How many had swum inside and never swam out? I thought about Christina's comment before the dive. About 3 previous expeditions losing people to equipment failure and disorientation. About how the data she'd recovered showed biologics that didn't make sense. No, not equipment failure, not disorientation. Predation. The panic hit then. Really hit. My chest tightened, despite the steady flow of air from my regulator. My hands started shaking. The headlamp beam jerked across the walls, making the bioluminescence pulse faster, brighter, like it could sense my fear. Maybe it could. I wanted to bolt. Every instinct screamed at me to swim for that entrance, squeeze back through into the corridor, get out of this chamber and away from whatever was waiting in the dark behind me. My muscles tensed for it. My fins twitched. But I'd heard something moving out there. Something big. And the entrance was small, barely wide enough for me and my equipment. I'd have to go slow, careful, vulnerable. It would take me while I was stuck halfway through. I closed my eyes, forced myself to think. 20 years of diving. I'd handled equipment failures at depth, talked down panicking clients who'd forgotten how to breathe, navigated through kelp forests in zero visibility, fixed a torn dry suit at 120 feet, while narcosis made my hands feel like they belonged to someone else. I could handle this. I had to handle this. The Seawolf structure materialized in my mind, 3 dives worth of exploration, mapping corridors and compartments for Taylor's documentation requirements. I knew this submarine, knew where the torpedo room opened into the forward battery compartment, knew the galley connected to crew quarters through a hatch that hung at 90 degrees, knew the engine room was completely flooded, but the aft escape trunk still had an air pocket, somehow, after all these years. And I knew where the salvage team had placed their charges. The memory surfaced clear and sharp. Second dive, 5 days ago. I'd been documenting the exterior hull damage when I'd spotted the demo charges clamped to the starboard side, aft section. Small controlled explosives meant to breach the pressure hull for access to the engine compartment. The kind of thing salvage teams used when they needed to get inside fast, without spending weeks cutting through steel. Taylor had mentioned it in passing, said they'd set the charges during the previous expedition, but never detonated them. Some kind of equipment issue. They'd planned to remove them this trip once we'd finished the documentation work, which meant they were still there, still armed, still waiting for someone to trigger them. I started swimming before I'd fully processed the plan. Back through the entrance, slow and controlled despite every nerve screaming at me to hurry. The metal edges scraped against my tank. I exhaled to make myself smaller, pulled with my arms, kicked gently. The corridor opened up around me again. Empty. Dark except for my headlamp beam cutting through the silt I'd disturbed. But I could feel it. The presence I'd sensed before, pressing against the edges of my awareness. The thing that had followed me through the graveyard. It was tracking me. I turned toward the aft section. The corridor stretched ahead, buckled walls and hanging cables creating an obstacle course in the narrow beam of light. I swam fast but careful, one hand trailing along the bulkhead for orientation. The Seawolf groaned around me. Settling sounds, maybe. Or something else. Something moving through the flooded compartments parallel to my position. The scraping started 30 seconds later. Metal on metal. A grinding, deliberate sound that resonated through the hull, through the water, through my chest. It came from my left, then above, then behind. It was circling. Closing in. I kicked harder. The aft section couldn't be far now. 50 meters, maybe less. I just had to reach the charges before. The scraping got louder, closer. The hull shuddered. It was right there, right outside the steel walls, separated from me by inches of corroded metal and 80 years of seawater damage. I could hear it moving, could hear it hunting. The demolition panel hung there in the water column, corroded brackets barely holding it to what remained of the bulkhead. I'd spotted it on the way down, old civilian rig, retrofit job that never got finished. 2 shaped charges still mounted in their housings, armed and ready for a controlled breach that never came. 20 years of diving, and I'd never stolen ordnance before. My hands moved through the arming sequence anyway. Muscle memory from the Navy, back when I was young enough to think blowing things up underwater was a career path. Red safety cap twisted counterclockwise. Primer switch engaged with a click I felt more than heard. The first charge went live, indicator light glowing amber through the murk. I positioned it against a section of plating where the metal showed stress fractures. Corrosion had eaten through the welds, left the whole area compromised. Wouldn't take much to punch through. Just needed enough force to create an opening I could fit through. The second charge fought me. Housing bracket had seized up, wouldn't release clean. I worked it back and forth, precious seconds bleeding away while my shoulder blades crawled with the certainty that something was closing the distance behind me. Bracket gave. I caught the charge before it could drift away, pressed it against the plating 18 inches from the first. The stress fractures ran between them in a rough diagonal. If I'd calculated right, the simultaneous detonation would peel that whole section back like opening a can. If I'd calculated wrong, The blast would pulp me against the hull. I set the timer for 10 seconds. Both charges. Synchronized detonation. That's when the bulkhead behind me exploded inward. Not exploded. Smashed. The metal shrieked as something massive punched through it with enough force to send a pressure wave rolling across my back. I twisted around, still gripping the detonator, and saw the thing coming through the rupture it had just created. It knew. Somehow, it knew what I was planning. The appendages came first. Those limbs that moved wrong, that bent at angles that didn't make sense, even accounting for water resistance. Then the body, if you could call it that. Too large for the opening. It shouldn't have fit. But the edges of the torn metal bent and curled away as it pushed through, and I couldn't tell if the thing was crushing itself smaller or if the opening was widening beyond what physics should allow. No time to figure it out. I triggered the detonation and kicked off the hull with everything I had left. The world went white and red and roaring. Fire underwater. You don't see that often. Shouldn't happen at all, not at this depth. But whatever propellant those charges used burned hot enough to turn the surrounding water to superheated steam. The expanding gases hit me like a truck, sent me tumbling away from the hull with my arms wrapped around my head and my regulator clenched between my teeth. The plating peeled back exactly how I'd hoped. Jagged metal edges curled outward, creating an opening maybe 3 feet across. Steam and bubbles and debris churned through the gap, but beyond it I could see open water. Darker water. Deeper water. But open. I didn't look back to see what the blast had done to the creature. Didn't want to know if it was still coming. Just pulled myself through the ruptured hull with my arms while my fins scraped against the torn edges, and something sharp caught my leg hard enough that I felt it through the wetsuit. Then I was through. Outside the wreck. Nothing but water above me, and that terrible pressure all around, and the knowledge that I'd just abandoned every safety protocol I'd ever learned. The ascent started before I'd made the conscious decision to begin it. Survival instinct. Pure and simple. My legs kicked and my arms pulled, and I rose through the water column like a cork, watching my depth gauge spin backward through numbers that should have taken hours to climb. 200 feet. 180. 160. My computer screamed at me. Red lights flashing, alarm beeping in my ear. Decompression limits exceeded. Ascent rate critical. The warning scrolled past too fast to read individual words. Just a continuous stream of digital panic, telling me what my body already knew. I was going to pay for this. 140. 120. The nitrogen in my bloodstream, dissolved under pressure, held in solution by the weight of all that water, started coming out. Too fast. No time for my lungs to process it, for my body to adjust. Bubbles forming in my joints, my tissues, my blood. I could feel it starting, a deep ache in my knees that spread to my elbows, my shoulders. 100 feet. 80. My vision started to blur. Not from the speed, though I was rising fast enough that the water pressure dropped moment by moment and my ears popped continuously. Something wrong with my eyes themselves. A hot feeling behind them, pressure building. 60 feet. 40. I broke through a thermocline and the temperature shift hit me like a wall. Warmer water. Sun-touched water. Surface had to be close. I could see the light now, diffused and dancing. The underside of the waves catching the afternoon sun. 20 feet. My joints felt like someone had driven nails through them. Both knees, left elbow, right shoulder. The ache had turned to burning, and the burning had turned to something sharper. Each kick sent pain lancing up my thighs. Each pull of my arms made my shoulder sockets scream. 10 feet. I surfaced in a spray of foam and exhaled air, ripping my regulator out and gasping. The sunlight stabbed into my eyes and I squeezed them shut, but not before I saw the support vessel maybe 30 yards away. Close. Too close for how disoriented I'd been down there. "Miles!" Joshua's voice, distant and then closer, the boat engine revving. I tried to wave, to signal I was alive, but my right arm wouldn't cooperate properly. The shoulder joint had seized up, locked in place by whatever was happening inside it. I managed to lift my left hand instead, got it maybe a foot above the water before exhaustion pulled it back down. The boat pulled alongside. I heard Joshua moving fast, his footsteps heavy on the deck. Then he was leaning over the gunwale and reaching for me. "Grab on!" I tried. Got my left hand around his wrist, but I didn't have the strength to hold on. My fingers kept slipping, wetsuit gloves sliding against his skin. He caught me anyway, hooked both hands under my arms and hauled me up with the kind of strength you don't appreciate until you need it. I came out of the water in a rush, cleared the gunwale and collapsed onto the deck in a heap of limbs and equipment that didn't want to move right. "Medical kit," Joshua shouted, though I couldn't tell who he was shouting at. "Get the medical kit now." I lay there on my side, salt water draining from my suit, and tried to focus on his face. Couldn't quite manage it. Everything had gone blurry, soft around the edges. I blinked hard and felt something warm run down my cheek. Blood. Had to be blood. "Your eyes." Joshua's voice had gone tight. "Jesus, Miles, your eyes." The capillaries had burst. I knew that without seeing it. Could feel the wrongness, the heat, the pressure finally releasing in the worst possible way. Blood vessels rupturing under my skin, behind my retinas, everywhere the nitrogen bubbles had formed and expanded and done their damage. My knees drew up involuntarily as another wave of pain rolled through my joints. The bends. Full decompression sickness. I'd known it was coming, had accepted it as the price of getting out alive. But knowing and experiencing turned out to be very different things. How long was I down? My voice came out rough, broken. 43 minutes total. Joshua's hands moved over me, checking for injuries, assessing damage. "You came up in under 3. Miles, you needed at least 20 minutes of decompression stops." "Yeah." I knew. He got my helmet off, my BC unclipped. The weight of the equipment disappeared piece by piece, but the pain stayed constant. Someone else was there now. I could hear another voice, higher pitched, but the words wouldn't resolve into meaning. "Camera's still recording," Joshua said. He sounded far away, though I could feel his hands on my suit. "Your helmet cam. It ran the whole time." That cut through the fog. The camera. Evidence. Proof of what I'd seen down there, what had chased me through that wreck and nearly killed me in the dark. "Get the footage," I managed. "Everything. Pull all of it." "We will. Stay still." Someone pressed something cold against my arm. IV line, probably. Fluids and oxygen and whatever else they could pump into me to help my body process the nitrogen before it did more damage. Too little, too late. But better than nothing. I don't know how long I lay there. Time went soft and elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that didn't make sense. Joshua stayed close. I could hear him talking on the radio, coordinating something. Medical evacuation, maybe. Coast Guard. Eventually the pain stabilized. Didn't improve, but stopped getting worse. That felt like a victory. "Christina's got your camera," Joshua said at some point. "She's pulling the files now." Christina, the tech specialist. I'd met her once before, briefly. Young woman, sharp eyes, knew her way around data recovery. "Tell her to check everything," I said. "All the footage from inside the wreck." "She knows." More time passed. The boat rocked gently on the swells. My vision started to clear just slightly, enough to make out shapes, colors. Joshua's face resolved into focus, his expression tight with concern. Christina says there's a problem. Of course there was. What kind of problem? He didn't answer right away. I heard footsteps, light and quick. Then a woman's voice speaking in rapid technical jargon I couldn't quite follow. Joshua responded, his tone questioning. She said something else. Then Joshua was back, leaning into my field of view. The files are corrupted, he said. All of them. Every recording from inside the wreck. I tried to sit up. My body informed me that was a terrible idea, and I stayed down. Corrupted how? Christina says it's all static, every file. She's tried 3 different recovery methods, and it's the same result. Just visual noise and audio distortion. Nothing usable. The camera had run the whole time. I'd felt it on my helmet, that familiar, slight weight. It had recorded everything. The corridors, the markings, the thing that had chased me. 43 minutes of footage that would prove I hadn't lost my mind down there in the dark. All of it gone. Turned to static. I closed my eyes and felt the boat rock beneath me and tried not to think about what that meant. Taylor called me 2 days after they hauled me back aboard the support vessel. I was still in the hospital then, ribs wrapped tight enough I could barely draw a full breath. She didn't come herself. Just the phone call, her voice flat and professional through the receiver. The contract was terminated effective immediately. Pacific Recovery Solutions appreciated my service. Compensation would reflect the abbreviated timeline and the quote, unexpected complications encountered during operations. What complications? I asked. My throat still felt raw from the decompression chamber, every word scraping. The mission parameters changed, she said. The client decided not to proceed with the salvage. The client. I shifted against the hospital pillows, felt the pull of bruised muscle across my back. You mean whatever government agency actually hired you? Silence on the line. Then, a settlement package is being prepared. It includes medical expenses, the agreed-upon daily rate through mission conclusion, and additional compensation for your discretion regarding operational details. My discretion. A standard non-disclosure agreement. Our legal team will have the documents ready when you're released from medical care. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counted the small perforations in the acoustic panels. And if I don't sign? Then we proceed with the base contract terms only. Her tone didn't change. Might as well have been reading a weather report. No additional compensation. No medical coverage beyond what workers' comp requires. I think you'll find the settlement more than fair, Miles. The way she said my name. Professional courtesy with nothing behind it. Yeah, I said. I'm sure I will. She ended the call 30 seconds later. The lawyer showed up on my last day in the hospital. Young guy, maybe 30, with a leather portfolio and a smile that never reached his eyes. He laid out the paperwork on the rolling tray table they'd given me for meals. 15 pages, single-spaced. I read through it twice while he sat there checking his phone. The settlement amount made my chest tight for reasons that had nothing to do with cracked ribs. Enough to cover 6 months of back payments on the shop lease. Enough to settle the equipment loans. Enough to actually stock inventory again. Maybe hire someone part-time for the counter. Enough to make me forget what I'd seen down there. That was the trade, spelled out in dense legal language across those 15 pages. I couldn't discuss the dive. Couldn't mention Pacific Recovery Solutions in connection with any salvage operations. Couldn't disclose the location, the vessel designation, any personnel involved. or any observations made during the contracted period. What if someone asks why I was in the hospital? I said. The lawyer looked up from his phone. Diving accident during a routine commercial operation. That's not covered by the NDA. It's factual and vague enough to satisfy casual inquiry. And if I violate the agreement? Full repayment of the settlement, plus liquidated damages of 3 times that amount, plus legal fees. He said it the same way you'd give directions to the grocery store. There's also a clause about criminal liability for disclosure of classified information, but that's the client's prerogative to pursue, not ours. Classified information. So it was government after all. I picked up the pen he'd brought. Heavy thing. Probably cost more than my truck payment. My hand shook a little when I signed. Blamed it on the medication. The check cleared 3 days later. I was back in my apartment by then, moving slow, sleeping in a recliner because lying flat made my ribs scream. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee gone cold, searching for any mention of the operation. Started with Pacific Recovery Solutions website. Found their portfolio page, glossy photos of successful salvage operations going back a decade. Searched by date range, nothing from the past 2 months. Tried their news section, press releases about contracts in the Gulf, a decommissioned oil platform off Alaska, partnership announcements with marine research institutions. No mention of deep ocean recovery operations. No mention of that specific grid coordinate. I knew better than to expect anything. Still felt the absence like a missing tooth. Ran searches through maritime databases I had access to through the dive shop's commercial license. Incident reports, salvage filings, navigation hazards. Put in the coordinates as close as I could remember them. The search came back empty. Expanded the range by 50 nautical miles. Nothing. The operation had been scrubbed. Professionally, thoroughly, completely. I closed the laptop and sat there looking at my hands. The bruising had started to fade, purple-black to greenish-yellow around my wrists where the emergency ascent had slammed me against the support lines. Small price, really. Joshua had pulled me up fast enough that the bends didn't kill me, slow enough that I didn't stroke out from the pressure change. Professional work. Everyone had done their jobs, and now the job had never happened at all. 3 weeks in that apartment. The shop stayed closed. I'd put a sign in the window before I took the contract, told my few regular customers I'd be back mid-month. That timeline had come and gone. The first week I barely moved. Ribs kept me pinned to the recliner, breathing shallow, sleeping in 2-hour blocks. Doctor had given me pain medication, but I stopped taking it after 3 days. Made everything fuzzy, and I needed to think clearly. Needed to process what had happened down there. The second week I started moving around more, walked to the kitchen and back, stood at the window looking out at the street, made meals I didn't eat. The bruising faded. The sharp pain in my ribs dulled to a persistent ache. But I couldn't stop seeing those eyes. Not human. That's what I kept coming back to. The intelligence behind them had been nothing like human intelligence. When it looked at me through that gap in the chamber wall, when it studied me with that dark, unblinking gaze, I'd felt assessed, categorized, understood in some fundamental way that had nothing to do with language or shared experience. It had known exactly what it was doing when it sealed me inside. I'd replayed that moment 1,000 times during those 3 weeks. The sound of the metal groaning, the vibration through the chamber walls, the way the opening had contracted with deliberate precision. Not violent, not panicked, methodical. It had trapped me, contained me. The question I couldn't answer was why it had let me go. Third week I started leaving the apartment. Short walks at first, just around the block. then longer ones down to the waterfront, standing at the edge of the marina watching boats come and go. The ocean looked different now, flatter somehow, less infinite. I'd spent 20 years diving. Thought I understood the water, understood the depths, understood my place in that vast blue world. Thought the mystery was just a matter of going deep enough, looking hard enough, cataloging everything with proper scientific rigor. But that thing in the chamber, whatever it was, wherever it had come from, it existed in a space beyond cataloging, beyond understanding. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. Some things in the deep ocean had their own logic, their own purpose, their own intelligence that had nothing to do with human frameworks or human needs. I could accept that now. Had to accept it. The alternative was madness. By the end of the third week, I'd made the first payment on the shop lease. Covered 2 months, current and back. Called the equipment supplier and settled the outstanding invoice. Set up a payment plan for the rest. The settlement money sat in my business account, a number on a screen that represented something I couldn't quite name. Security, maybe. Or the price of silence. Both, probably. I drove down to the shop on a Tuesday morning, unlocked the door for the first time in over a month. The air inside smelled stale, dust on the counter, wet suits hanging limp on their racks. Everything exactly where I'd left it. Flipped the lights on, booted up the ancient computer behind the register, pulled the closed sign out of the window. The shop would survive. The business would continue. I'd take clients out for recreational dives, teach certification courses, rent equipment to tourists who wanted to see colorful fish and maybe a sea turtle if they got lucky. Safe dives, shallow water, nothing below 100 feet. That would be enough. Had to be enough. I stood behind the counter, hands flat on the worn surface, and thought about Taylor's voice on that hospital phone. Professional. Distant. Transactional. She'd known what was down there. Maybe not the specifics. Maybe not the exact nature of what we'd find. But she'd known it was more than a simple salvage operation. The briefing had been too vague, the security too tight, the money too good. And I'd taken the contract anyway. Needed the money too badly to ask the right questions. That was on me. The settlement would save the shop and clear the debts, yeah. Give me a fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to rebuild without the constant weight of financial panic. But the cost had been greater than I'd anticipated when I'd signed Taylor's contract. Greater than I could have understood standing on that support vessel, suiting up for what I'd thought would be a straightforward recovery dive. The cost was knowing, was seeing, was understanding that the ocean I'd spent 2 decades exploring was deeper and stranger and more terrible than I'd ever imagined. And I could never tell anyone what I'd learned. I stood outside the shop with the certifications in my hand. All of them. PADI Master Scuba Diver, SSI Deep Diving Specialty, WWII Rec Penetration, TDI Advanced Trimix, 20 years of training and testing and logged hours, reduced to a stack of laminated cards and embossed papers that weighed maybe 6 ounces total. The morning sun hit the storefront windows at an angle that made the faded lettering, Harvey's Dive Services, look even more worn than usual. Salt residue traced white patterns across the glass. I'd been meaning to clean those windows for months. Wouldn't matter now. The metal trash can sat at the curb where it always did, waiting for Tuesday pickup. Green paint flaking off in patches. Dented on one side from when some tourist backed into it last summer. I walked over to it, my boots scraping against the concrete, and dropped the certifications inside. They landed with a soft rustle against the empty bottom, too quiet for what they represented. I'd carried a lighter in my pocket since yesterday. Not sure why. Didn't smoke anymore, Hadn't for years. But I'd grabbed it from the drawer behind the counter where I kept the emergency flares and first aid supplies, slipped it into my jeans without thinking about it. Turned out I'd been thinking about it just fine. I flicked the lighter open. The old Zippo Christina had given me when I first opened the shop. Said every boat captain needed a reliable flame. The metal was warm from being against my leg. I spun the wheel once, twice. The flame caught on the third try, wavering in the morning breeze coming off the bay. For a second, I just stood there, held the flame above the trash can and watched it dance. Then I dropped it. The papers caught faster than I expected. The lamination on the cards melted first, bubbling and blackening, giving off that acrid chemical smell that burned the back of my throat. The paper certificates underneath curled at the edges, brown spreading inward from the flames, and the embossed seals, all those official stamps and signatures from diving organizations across 3 continents, blackened and disappeared into ash. I watched the WWII certification go first. That one I'd earned in the Gulf of Mexico, 22 years old and thinking I'd found my calling. The instructor had been a former Navy diver named Patterson, who'd made us run drills until our fingers went numb in the cold water. He'd signed that certificate himself, told me I had steady hands and a good head for depth. The TDI Trimix card went next. Advanced gas mixtures, technical diving beyond recreational limits. That certification had cost me $3,000 and 2 months of training. Let me take clients down to wrecks that most divers would never see. Let me go deep enough to find the sea wolf. Smoke rose from the trash can in a thin gray column. A woman walking her dog across the street glanced over, slowed her pace, kept walking when I didn't look up. Probably figured I was burning junk mail or old receipts. Normal Tuesday morning business. The flames settled into a steady burn. I could see my master diver card through the smoke, the photo still visible. Me at 38, before the gray started showing at my temples, grinning at the camera because I'd just gotten back from a charter in the Caymans, where a couple from Toronto had tipped me $200 for showing them a reef shark up close. That version of me had no idea what waited in deep water. The photo curled inward and vanished. The fire was dying down. Just embers now, glowing orange against the charred remains of paper and plastic. The breeze scattered ash across the inside of the trash can, coating the metal in fine gray dust. I gripped the edge of the trash can. The metal was warm now from the fire. The flames had gone out completely now. Just smoke and heat shimmer rising from the trash can. I could still make out fragments. A corner of laminated plastic, part of the Paddy logo, the edge of what might have been my master diver card. But mostly just ash, gray and black and weightless, coating the bottom of the can in a layer that would blow away with the next strong wind. 20 years, gone in 5 minutes. I stepped back from the trash can. My hands smelled like lighter fluid and smoke. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the marine layer, and the street was getting brighter. Someone had opened the coffee shop 2 doors down. I could smell espresso and baked goods drifting on the breeze. The shop behind me sat quiet. I'd locked it last night and hadn't opened it this morning. Wouldn't open it tomorrow either. Eventually I'd need to deal with the inventory, tanks and regulators and wetsuits, all the gear that represented thousands of dollars in equipment. Need to make calls, cancel charters, return deposits, close it down properly. But not today. Today I just stood there in the morning light, watching smoke rise from a trash can full of ash, and felt the weight of the ocean at my back even though the bay was 3 blocks away. I was done diving. The certifications were gone and I was done.